So for task one, it was the interview questions. I'm going to summarize the questions first, and then we'll have another one of our group members summarize the second part to task one. So we primarily based our questions on how parents felt in regards to their workloads, their interactions in the home, their availability, their time, and pretty much their feelings in regards to their appreciation and their satisfaction with the work that they are doing on a daily basis, both in the home, but also in terms of like how them as an employee feel working for the company.
All right, so why this survey is important, because the house parents are the level 2 secondary level of the organizational needs, and they have they run the service and have direct contact with the kids. And so this information is important because administrators need to understand the needs of the house parents. If they do not understand those needs, it creates those discrepancies, and it makes it hard and creates that low morale. So gathering that information to see where house parents stand as far as what they feel is working and what they feel needs to change is why we did the survey for the house parents.
Okay, moving on to the interview protocol. We included 6 steps for implementing the individual interviews. The steps include deciding to use the technique described in our textbook, selecting the individuals to be interviewed, attending to the little details and arrangements in order to make the interviews happen, coming up with the interview questions, conducting the actual interview, and then finally to analyze the report results. So starting with step 1, deciding whether or not to use the technique for the needs assessment committee. For this particular case study, individuals would help the needs assessment committee get the answers that might not be otherwise available with the other techniques. So while it is possible to use a Likert scale to see how participants may feel on a certain topic, it doesn't allow for the potential for follow-up questions that you might get with conducting an individual interview. So because of this, individuals may also feel at ease when talking to an actual person instead of just responding to a survey. Moving on to the second step, selecting the individuals to be interviewed. So there are different options when it comes to deciding who to interview, including management, house parents, assistants, supervisors, therapists. However, it wouldn't be in the best interest for our needs assessment to select all of them. And especially with the children that live there, it wouldn't be best or beneficial to include young children because their answers may not be helpful for our needs assessment. So it's best for the interviews to just focus on the house parents in order to get a sense of what is causing low morale. Moving on to the third step, attending to the little details and the arrangements. So in this case, it would be beneficial to be mindful of the house parents and their needs. So especially if the house parents are on duty, that they might have to step out for a certain amount of time in order to get the interview done. So just to be mindful of that and having all those needs taken care of, like who will be watching the children in the meantime while they are away. Moving on to step 4 to come up with the actual interview questions. So the questions that are developed should help draw conclusions from the data. And it's also important to avoid any questions that might be heavily opinionated in order to reduce bias, especially with any former residents or children that have had negative experiences at CCHF. And then when we actually do conduct the interview, the needs assessment committee could conduct the interview in different ways. So as long as the interview gets done, the method is not necessarily important. But it could be helpful to conduct the interview in person if you want to look at body language in terms of how do they respond to the questions. And then finally, when it comes time to analyze the results, it would be helpful to have a kind of visualization, which is why a fishbone analysis would be beneficial to look at all the data, to see all the common themes, all sub-themes, and different categories from all that data. So through this visualization of data, the committee is able to see all the common themes that appear throughout each interview.
And as we talk about analyzing data, that actually brings us into task 3 and 4. So for task 3, we looked at the results that was provided to us in the case study, and we found themes, sub-themes, and categories. We noticed between all of our responses, this was my response of the themes, sub-themes, and categories. Arianna had found hers, Rudy and Martin. We all started finding that our answers overlapped. So when we got into task 4 and we started putting together our fishbowl analysis, we kind of picked and prioritized pretty much what our the 4 basic needs, the 4 prioritized needs are. So at the head of the fishbone is, according to the textbook, that should be the needs. So the purpose of the needs assessment. So for us, for the case study, it is the low morale among the house parents. So that's the overarching theme. Then when we get down into like our sub themes, we have lack of support for house parents, poor working conditions for house parents, basic programming for children. And when we mention basic programming, while on one hand that could be viewed as a good thing, through the parents' responses, we learned that the basic program, they do mention that it's a good start, but they do start to recognize and point out other aspects of the programming that could be added to actually help benefit the students. And then lastly, we also pointed out the overwhelming workload. So we felt like those 4 categories really captured what we were talking about in our individual submissions. Talking about the disconnect between management and house parents, how from house parent to house parent, how they don't have really an opportunity to really talk with one another, how house parents feel that they don't really have a say in how to help the students. Low pay has been a big thing that has been from part A to part B, has been pretty much an overarching thing by itself. Working conditions, so not having enough support in the house parents, supervisors having to do other duties. There are too many children to house parents in the house. House parents have even noted that they can make better connections if they didn't have as many children within the house. Parents feeling like the children needs more to learn life skills, be held accountable when they're doing illegal activities. A lot of times the parents feel like they're given a free pass due to what they deal with. Just the overwhelming workload. And one major thing that was talked about was the need to complete paperwork and attend meetings and the little downtime that they have. And then not only that, the parents pointed out that the information is pretty much starting to become repetitive for them. So not only are they losing the downtime, but then they're getting the same information that they have already received. So that's more or less what we have pointed out, those examples of that. So that's kind of how we was able to group together the results that we received from all the responses in the interview, including the responses from the residents or the children who had actually aged out and actually lived in their own separate housing within CCHF. So as we look at the case study, we also completed a SWOT analysis. So for strengths that I pointed out within the case study, while yes, there are challenges, there are room for improvement, there are things that will threaten the possibility of this becoming successful. Allowing house parents to do at least one outside activity with the children has been very successful for them. Overall, there's a good rapport with the children and the house parents and feeling appreciated by them. The new CEO has been making small changes, and I feel like the big overarching change that the CEO is trying to do right now is trying to get to the root of the low morale so she can completely change that around. The parents, without a doubt, said it was a safe environment. The children had actually pointed out that it has a family-like environment. So that was something strong that they can continue on doing. It is a good starting point for at-risk children while they did mention other opportunities, but it is a good starting point. And then other house parents will often help other house parents when they have children with unruly behavior. For example, some of the boy cottages, the boys can get violent, so they can call it. A lot of times they've been able to call in other house parents to help them.
And along with those strengths, there are also weaknesses that remain, one of which is the lack of consistency when it comes to assistance for house parents. Sometimes the assistants do appear, but it's not every single time. So for most of the time, it's just the house parents taking care of all the children in their household. There's also a lack of communication between management and employees, so it's just part of the overall disconnect between the two. A desired decrease to remain employed at CCHF. A lot of them are left with a lack of feeling like a lack of purpose. An inability to reduce the number of children per family, which then goes on to affect the relationships between house parents and their children. The insufficient compensation for the house parents, considering the amount of work they do, but not being able to have that reflected in their pay. And then, of course, the stressful environment with the long work hours that they are done on a regular basis.
But this does open up to a laundry list of opportunities, starting with building different bonds and relationships, not only between the house parents, but also amongst the children, implementing policies that would offer structure and control in the homes, not just for, not just for the children, but also for the house parents to have a commonality amongst certain structures. Management will then be able to start understanding the day-to-days of the houses and expand the compensation opportunities based on the understanding that they gathered. It'll reduce the number of children in each home, but also adding additional staff support to the homes as well. And then from there, it would offer up the idea to expand life skills and lessons of accountability for the children.
And then there are the threats. So for threats, the number of kids in one house can be an issue just because of the attention or lack of attention that kids would be receiving, which is also create a house parents feeling burnt out. Along with that, we have kids switching house parents every week can be another issue just because of the systems and structures that one house parents might set up could be different from the other house parents, and that is caused because of the lack of communications between the house parents, which going on to the low employee turnover from that because of the burnout. And then organizational funding. Are there funding for the different opportunities or additional resources? And the house parent's salary, the workload that house parents has to deal with on a day-to-day basis is a lot, and their salary doesn't reflect that. And then kids also staying in the program for a short while. So it's that can be difficult to build relationships when kids are only there for a few weeks or a couple of months. So these are some threats that